Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Beyond the Rail for this much warmer day. I don't know if you've been outside lately, but it's kind of all right out there. Gone is the absolute deep freeze, and here is like, how many degrees was it today? Like -2 or something like that? -5. And -5 is almost shorts weather. Almost. Like not actually, but it's getting close. It's at I would assume around 2 o'clock today. You might not even need a jacket necessarily, but you'll probably wear one anyway, just on principle. And this is the first Sunday in Lent, and the first Sunday in Lent is the Sunday where we talk about the temptation of Jesus Christ. Like that's what kicks Lent off, because Lent is a 40-day period because of the temptation of Christ for the 40 days in the wilderness. He goes out into the wilderness for the full 40 days and is tempted by the devil. And his fasting in the wilderness for the 40 days is supposed to bring to our minds fasting for 40 days as well. Now, growing up, I went to a Catholic school, but I was not Catholic myself. But I went to the Catholic school. And growing up and going to Catholic school, they would always have a big emphasis on Lenten sacrifice. They would always say, whoa, what are you giving up for Lent? And people would give things up for Lent and whatnot. And people would just make decisions as to what to give up. But frequently they give things up that would not impinge on them that much. They'd give up like chocolate, or they'd give up desserts, or they'd give up very, very, very mild things. But it was quite rare that they'd give up things that were like truly and genuinely significant to the point that it would like impact their lives on a daily basis. Like you give up chocolate, like unless you have chocolate like 4 or 5 times a day on the regular, you can go without chocolate and not miss it too terribly much. But boy, oh boy, Christ goes into the wilderness and goes without everything for the 40 days. And that's where he's tempted by the devil. And that 40-day stretch is what brings us the season of Lent, the season of abstinence, of penitence, of withdrawal from things that are earthly. We go through that period because it's good for us to do it. Now, there's nothing mandated in the act of Christ in the wilderness that tells us that we have to go through a 40-day period as well. But largely we do because it's good for us. Largely we do because it helps us spiritually to go through a season of fasting, abstinence, withdrawal, that kind of thing. It depends what you mean by fasting. The last few years, I went and did the Orthodox fasting, which what they do for fasting isn't like going without food completely. But what they do is they go and they go without meat, wine, which is all alcohol, oil, and dairy for the full 40 days. So you got to change up a lot of what you do, because that means that there's a lot of stuff you can't have. Now, when they say meat in the Orthodox world, meat is anything that has a spine. So if you are an invertebrate, you don't count as meat. So that means you can have octopus, and you can eat crickets if you feel like it. You can eat a lot of shrimp, and a lot of oysters, that kind of thing, but you can't eat anything that has a backbone in it. So that's the fasting that I did for the last couple of years, and that went fine. It was okay. It was burdensome and difficult, but you do it. I haven't done the thing where you just don't eat at all for a period of time. I still eat, but you can change up what you do. But none of these things are mandated in Scripture. Like we're biblical people, so at no point in the Bible does it say for a 40-day period you have to go without chocolate or without dessert or without TV or anything like that. But it does tell you that there is fasting that can and should be done. But it lets you define what that fasting is. Now that's actually not a bad thing, and I'll explain why. Because if you are somebody who is aware of, like if we were Muslims and we're not Muslims, but they fast for Ramadan, and that's a month-long period in which you go without eating between sunup and sundown. So no food, no water, no smoking, no nothing, between sunup and sundown for a month. Okay, fine. But here's the question. which is, let's say that you are an observant Muslim, a very, very pious Muslim, but you live up in the Arctic Circle, and the sun never goes down. So what do you do? If you can't eat from sunup to sundown, but the sun never goes down because it's a month-long period where the sun never sets, do you just die? Or what do you do? And the answer that they've come up with is they said, well, no, I guess you can't just die, so the policy should be then that you fast between when sunup and sundown would be in Mecca or whatever. But that's not what it says. It doesn't say in the Quran, fast between sunup and sundown in Mecca, because realistically, because their calendar moves around, you could choose to live somewhere where the sun, like here, it's dark for most of the day in the wintertime. Well, I mean, like fasting between, like, I don't know, 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. is not that hard to do. If you eat a really big breakfast at 10 a.m. and you eat a really big supper at 5 p.m., you might not even notice. So, yeah, the idea is that fasting is not a hard and fast rule, because once something is a hard and fast rule in the scriptures, people will immediately try and find a way around it. I want you to picture those times when people, like the scribes and the Pharisees, went up to Jesus and they said things to him like, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Or when the Sadducees went up to Jesus and said, so if a man has a wife and he dies without having any children, his brother takes his wife and he also dies, and then his brother, and then 7 brothers take her as a wife and none of them produce any children, and then they die, and then the woman also dies, whose wife is she going to be in heaven? Like, those kinds of questions are not questions where you're looking for any kind of spiritual truth. They're just loophole questions. Questions that will say, if we're not allowed to walk a certain number of steps on the Sabbath, can we walk a certain number of steps accidentally, but get where we want to go? If we're not allowed to harvest things on the Sabbath, can we pluck branches by accident, and will that be a problem? Can we turn our lights on and off by accident, and is that morally okay? And then if that is okay, then what will happen is you'll end up turning your lights on or off or harvesting or whatever by accident on purpose, because that's how that goes. If there was a hard and fast rule in the scriptures that said, well, I guess one of my favorite ones is, now I'm not Roman Catholic and nor are you, but the Roman Catholics don't let you eat meat on Friday. So what do they eat on Friday? Fish. Why doesn't fish count as meat? I will never understand that in my whole life. They say, well, because Christ died on a Friday, we can't eat meat, so we'll only eat fish. Like, in what universe is fish not meat? Like, it's meat, right? Like,
that's why Burger King used to have the Fish Friday?
Sort of, but no. That's a great question, Chris. Chris asked, is that why Burger King used to have fish on Friday? Yeah, that's a great question. Sort of, but no. You would think, now, because Burger King and McDonald's both did that. When they had their meal of the day, on Friday it was the BK Big Fish, and on Friday at McDonald's it was the Filet-O-Fish. Now, you would think that was as a concession to observant Roman Catholics, that they would make their Friday sandwich their fish sandwich, because wouldn't that be great? Actually, no. It seems that way, but what that actually is Burger King knows, because Burger King's got a brain, what's their sandwich of the day on Wednesday?
Whopper.
It is the Whopper, Whopper Wednesday, right? Now, their most popular sandwich is the Whopper, right? That's the one that you actually go out to get. Now, Burger King also knows that the majority of people who are going to go out and get fast food are going to go out and get fast food on a Friday or whatever, right? They're not going to go midweek. They have the Whopper on Wednesday to tempt you into going for food midweek on the Wednesday, but on the day they think you're already going to go, they have their least popular sandwich as the deal of the day, because they figure that you're going to go on a Friday anyway. So they're not going to offer the Whopper or the BK Big King or the Stacker on a Friday, because why bother? So what they're going to do is they're going to put their least popular sandwich, i.e. the BK Big Fish, on the Friday, so that people who go on the Friday anyway are going to say, I don't want your deal of the day, it's the Big Fish. I don't like that sandwich, because almost nobody does. But yeah, For a long time, Chris, I assumed also that like Burger King was making a concession to Pope Francis and was saying, well, it's fish on Friday, man. That's just how we're going to do it.
I also thought it might have just been like alliteration, like Whopper Wednesday.
Fish Friday.
Yeah.
That'd be not bad too. Now, there's nothing wrong, by the way, with having an observance and having a fast, like that kind of, like, those are good things. Like they do sharpen you as an observant Christian. To be in a time of fasting and abstinence is good for you. But the scriptures are far too smart to tell you what the requirements would be for fasting, because they're well aware that as soon as they did, you'd be looking for loopholes right away. You'd be trying to say, well, that seems really hard. How can we figure out how to make that easier? I know the Bible says to not eat between, or the Quran says not to eat between sunup and sundown. How do we make that easier so that that doesn't kill us? And the answer is never to just like move out of the Arctic Circle. The answer is to do some sort of workaround in which you don't have to die for the observance of your fasting, that kind of thing. And now for us as Christians, again, we don't have a hard and fast rule on what fasting is. That's left up to you. You get to decide. When it says in the scriptures, all things are lawful, but not all things are profitable. All things are lawful, but I will not be mastered by anything. When it says that, your fasting gets to be the things that are mastering you. Your fasting gets to be the things that would hurt you and pinch you and trouble you to go without. That's a good thing. That's what's supposed to happen. You are supposed to say, you know, I don't mind going without something because that thing that I'm currently enjoying too much of is hurting me. It's not doing me a good job. I'm going to forcibly go without that thing and thereby sharpen my faith and make it more responsible. But that's a Christian fast. And as I say, it's less directly mandated, which is good, which means you can't get out of it. It becomes a commitment that you make, and therefore you have to observe that commitment. Now, on to the Epistle of James, as we are. James chapter 1, verses 12 through 18. Now, if I haven't gone through this before, I'm going to go through it now. The Epistle of James is not for somebody who is thinking about becoming a Christian. The Epistle of James is for somebody who is a Christian already. That's who the letters are written to, by and large, is to people that are already Christians. They're not really written for people who are thinking about starting down that path. And the reason I'm saying that about James is because the book of James, if you're reading it as somebody who is thinking about becoming a Christian, maybe, you'll get a very strange idea about what is required for you as a Christian. But the book of James begins with you having already believed in Christ and his atonement for your sins. It doesn't start with the idea that this is how you earn paradise. The book of James starts with the idea that you have already received the gift of salvation through Christ. And then you and I, as people who've received that gift of salvation, will then say, okay, great, but now what? Now what do we do? Now who are we? And James endeavors to answer that. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. I'm probably going to go verse by verse here and take my time on it. Remaining steadfast under trial and standing the test. It should be more adequately explained, and I guess the only reason it's not adequately explained is because people don't read the Bible anymore, but they really should read the Bible. But in there, you will never have in the Bible any kind of idea or understanding that there is not going to be a time of trial for you. Like, that is going to happen. That's not something, I mean, for some reason that surprises people in the here and now, where they will say, gee, you know, I was a Christian and I thought God was supposed to love me, but then things didn't go perfectly for my whole life. Like, gee, really? Why are you surprised by that? Why does that surprise you now? And secondly, why are you so unaware of the trials faced by the people in the scriptures? Like, why do you think that you, Josh Myerson, who doesn't exist, but I'm going to talk about him as though he does, Josh Myerson from Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, why do you think you are in some way more blessed and beloved by God than like all the apostles and prophets and saints. Like, why do you think that you, random person in the 21st century, were guaranteed an easy run of it by Jesus Christ, even though all of your ancestors in the faith suffered great hardship and trial? Like, there was a book out there called Fox's Book of Martyrs, which you may have heard of, you may not have heard of. If you have heard about it, great. If you haven't, don't worry about it. But that book was like standard reading for people. That book was like read by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. It was like up there on people's shelves next to the Bible. It was a story about people who had suffered martyrdom for the sake of their faith. And I'm not going to go Roman Catholic on you. Don't think that I am. I'm happily married. But for Roman Catholics, they have a much better idea of the saints than we do. Not the saints as people to be, now for us, we shouldn't have the saints as people to be worshipped or adored in the same way that we would Christ. But it would help us to know who they are and that they did, for the large part, endure suffering. Like, they endured testing. They endured a difficulty, hardship, testing, trial, that kind of thing. They didn't have perfect, wonderful lives that were easy going all the time. These were people who suffered for their faith, by and large. Now, we're not going to go over all the saints of like St. Francis, St. Teresa, like all these people that we wouldn't even recognize as saints. But you can sure talk about the disciples and talk about what happened to them. How did they do? Well, very poorly. We know that 11 out of 12 disciples, or if you'd like, 12 out of 13, died violently. Like they didn't, like the only disciple who died of natural causes was John the Revelator. That's it. The rest of them were killed. The rest of them were killed in like violent ways. You know the Union Jack, which is the flag of Great Britain, or the United Kingdom, I guess. That is a flag that is based off of 3 crosses put together. There's the cross of St. George, there's the cross of whoever the Welsh guy is, I don't remember, and then there's the cross of St. Andrew. That's the blue one for Scotland. That cross of St. Andrew is an X shape. It's not a sort of normal up and down cross. The reason that cross is an X shape is because St. Andrew was said to have been tied to an X-shaped cross and had his flesh scraped with iron combs to tear it off. Yeah, it's exactly what it looks like. Yeah, that's St. Andrew. Good. Now, that there is something that gets like lost. We don't really think about St. Andrew's martyrdom on an X-shaped cross, flayed with iron combs until his skin ran red. Who thinks about that often? Well, not us for the most part, but maybe we should. Because these are people who had to suffer for their faith. They really did. Now, that suffering for faith is built into the Christian faith. It's not something that comes later. That was built into it from the beginning. And for those of us who are Christians now, it's very shabby of us when we say things like, "Oh, yeah, like, oh, I'm a Christian, I believe in Jesus Christ," but then we like drop the faith the second something doesn't go our way. And it's often something very, very frail. Like, it's very rarely that we are like taken out back and threatened by the Gestapo for our Christian faith. More often than not, it's like, my dog died. And then you're like, that's it, I don't believe in Christ anymore because my dog died when I was 19 years old and the dog was 17. That's when I needed that dog the most. Like, get out of here. That's hard. A, that's hardly Christian suffering. And B, if you can't handle your pet dying, don't get a pet because they die. I hate to tell you that. These things are not immortal. And why you only believed in Christ so long as your dog was alive is quite beyond me. But people will do that. They will have this open idea that as a Christian, they are deserved nothing but good times. Which again, why would you place yourself above Moses and Elijah and Peter and Andrew and James, people who died for their faith, and there you are saying, yeah, but it's me. Like, surely God just wants me to win a jackpot and for me to have nothing but good times. Friends, I want you to think about the power outage in Texas that just happened. Anybody know about the power outage? Well, I know we were just talking about that a few minutes ago. But I, so here in the wonderful province of Saskatchewan, where I live, it was really cold like the last week. It was down to like minus 30 something. My car wouldn't start, all those kinds of things, right? Like we all lived through that. It was unpleasant. Well, here's the thing, folks, which is like 100 years ago, you didn't have to worry about your power grid failing. Well, not probably not 100, but 120 years ago, you didn't have to worry about your power grid failing because there wasn't any power. That's it. If you were a homesteading, you lived in a sod shack, and good luck to you. And you couldn't rely on there being a power grid to heat your home and cool your home and bring you hot and cold running Netflix every day. Like it just didn't exist. Meanwhile, now, like 120 years on, we're standing and saying, what hath God wrought, when there's like no immediate power? Man, for most of human history, that didn't exist. For most of human history, nobody could have dreamed of that level of luxury where if it gets cold, you can just go into your house and your house is toasty warm all the time. You're not feeding a pot-bellied stove manually. You're not pumping water manually. You're not doing any of that stuff. You're in such luxury. And people right now are still going to say, well, I can't believe God would put me through the trial of being minorly inconvenienced for a weekend. Really? You have more luxury than any human being who has ever lived. Solomon, in all of his opulence, couldn't hope to live like you do, and you're just some random person. Meanwhile, you're going to say, even of your opulence and your luxury and your decadence, of your nonstop fresh produce, fresh meat, fresh fish. Man, you could have meat at every meal if you felt like it. From now until the day you died, it wouldn't even be that hard to do. Meanwhile, most people, do you remember the story of the prodigal son? And the prodigal son, when he returns, and his father kills the fatted calf, and his brother gets angry. His brother says, well, you killed the fatted calf for this reprobate? Meanwhile, you've never even given me so much as a small goat to celebrate with my friends. Hey, everybody in the chat on Facebook Live, and also the people who are here present in this room, how many of you have ever eaten goat in your whole life? Nope, you never eaten goat? Anita, you ever eaten goat? Nope, you don't say, really. Now, why have you never even eaten goat? Because it's just like, too hard to get, or you just never thought about like debasing yourself that far to eat goat? You're like, oh, gross, goat, no thanks. Like jeepers, we've hit the point now where like the thing that the well-behaved son would have wanted was not available. He couldn't get. But meanwhile, you and I wouldn't even be bothered with it. We'd say, yeah, goat, yeah, no thanks. No thanks. Wow, that's a level of luxury, right? And here we are. So, yeah, like standing firm under trial is like we've got to really think about what our trials are and how willing we would be to stand up and be counted with them and for them. And to understand, to know, and to acknowledge that at the very basest level, and this is a very base level indeed, the trial that you will be required to undergo as a Christian is simply this: that if you are a non-Christian person these days, you can expect to have like praise and accolade and hugs and high fives and whatnot. If you out yourself as a Christian, somebody might say, "Ooh, gross, what?" One time. Like they won't try and kill you. They won't try and blow up your house and murder your family. They just might not like want to talk to you anymore. That's fine. That's okay. That's a very, very minor amount of trial that you may face, and it's perfectly acceptable to do so. Don't get too worked up about that. All right, next. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. That's worth remembering, by the way, that God doesn't try and tempt us, because it may be tempting for us to, it may be tempting for us to say, well, like you all know the Lord's Prayer, where it says, lead us not into temptation, right? But how grateful are we that God doesn't set us up to fail? There's a principle called entrapment. It's a legal principle. And what the principle of entrapment would mean would be to, like, let's say Chris is a career criminal and I'm a police officer. What I'm not allowed to do is I'm not allowed to let's say, get and let's say get a Lexus. Leave the Lexus unlocked outside Chris's house, and then ring Chris's doorbell as an undercover cop and say to him, "Hi, just so you know, I drove this Lexus here. I left it unlocked. I'm just going to drop the keys right here on your doormat, and I'm just going to walk away, and we're going to see what's going to happen." And then if Chris decides to take the car, I can't say, you're going to jail now, scumbag. That's entrapment. You can't try to get somebody to commit a crime and then catch them for doing so. You can catch them in the commission of a crime for sure, but you're not allowed to push or coerce them into doing so. That's not allowed. In the same way can you imagine if God was going to try and entrap you? Can you imagine if God in all of his glory and magnificence was going to try and make you fail? What a situation that would be if God was to say, "I want you to fail. I'm going to test you, but I'm going to test you with the idea that you should fail." He doesn't do that, and we're very grateful that he doesn't. Because if he did, we would. If God wanted to test us to the point of our failure, we would fail. Now, the devil is less good at this because the devil is not omnipotent. The devil is not all-powerful. He is not all-seeing. He is not all-knowing. The devil just knows what you tell him, basically. That's how that works. In the same way that any phone scammer on the telephone, when they call you, it's like a robo voice, and it says, "Hello, your social insurance number has been used for the commission of crimes. We now are going to prosecute you unless you press 1 and talk to our agent right away." Now, don't talk to their agent. This is not real. It's a scam. But if you do talk to them, what happens is they'll pick up the phone and they'll say, "Hello," and you'll say, "Hi there, I understand my social insurance number has been used in the commission of crimes." And they'll say, "Yes, sir, that's exactly what's happened." I'll say, "Good. Why don't you tell me what my social insurance number is if you know it's been used in the commission of crimes, so we can get to business on this?" And they'll say, "Well, we can't tell you that." And you go, "Great, because you don't know." That's what that is. But they will only know your social insurance number if you tell them. If you don't tell them, they don't know because they're trying to scam you. So don't tell them anything. They will only know what you tell them. In the same way, the devil only knows what you tell him. Now, granted, you've been telling the devil how to gather intel on you for a long time, and he knows by now what you're all about. The devil is well aware, my friends, of what your avenues for temptation are. And you know why? Because you tell him all the time. All the time, all the time. And you're not prone much to falling into new temptations. What you do is you go through the same things over and over and over again. Then you act surprised when the devil uses them against you. Why wouldn't he? But he only knows what you tell him. God knows everything. So if God wanted you to fail, if God tested you and put you through trial and temptation in order to make you fail, to test you, you'd never succeed. There is no way in this life or the next that you would be able to stand up to the temptations that God would provide, because God would just say, "Yeah, well, here we go. I'm going to tempt you and you're going to give in eventually, because my temptations will be, I can make things out of nothing. I can give you everything that your heart would desire to see if you'll fail." And we would. But God doesn't tempt us, and therefore we don't have to worry about being led into temptation in such a capacity. As it says in verse 14, "Each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and when sin is fully grown, it brings forth death." Yeah, we're tempted by our own desires. That's exactly what happens. We have in mind that, in some way, this is somebody else's fault, but it really isn't. Why do you do the things that you do? Because you want to. And that's a very important thing that has to be gotten across with, something that we have lost in terms of, our morality over, the last 100 years, give or take, is the idea that people commit sins because they want to. They do things of their own will because they want to do those things. Now, what we've placed in the world is this idea that people will sin because they like were tempted into it, or they were pushed or coerced, or they didn't know any better, or that's a part of their upbringing, or la 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 and blah blah blah. But what they don't do, or what we've lost, is the idea that people would sin because they openly desire to do so. Like they would look at their own lives and they would say, it benefits me to sin, therefore I will sin, and I will do these things out of my own desire and will and volition. I won't do these things because of any other extenuating circumstances. I will sin because I wish to do so. Now, that understanding requires you to have an understanding of people as being people who own and possess a sinful nature, which we do. There's a simple concept out there that's called concupiscence, and that's a $100 word for a $1 concept. And the $1 concept is, if you see a wallet on the ground in front of you, and wallets tend to have certain things in them. What do wallets usually have in them? Money, yeah, all the time. Money. What else? Money, social insurance number, credit cards. They also have your driver's license in it, usually. And what does your driver's license have on it? It has on it your address. Now, what that means is that if you find a wallet that has in it a driver's license and money, what you have there are two things. You have something that you can steal, and also you have a for sure knowledge of how to get that wallet back to that person if you want to do it. If you don't, then you can keep the money. Nobody would ever know. So what concupiscence does is concupiscence is what we would call original sin. And what that is that you would see that wallet full of money, and that concupiscence is your desire to take that money and to not do the right thing. The right thing is to get that wallet back to somebody. You can't claim, well, I don't know whose it is, could be anybody's. No, you know whose that is because it tells you. It's got a person's picture in it, it's got their address, it's got enough information for you to go off of to get that wallet back to that person should you so desire to do so. If you don't want to do it, that's because you have elected not to do so. You've chosen not to. And that concupiscence is that desire to do that. That desire that brings forth death, that desire which brings forth sin, and sin bringing forth death, that's what that is. You would take that money because you want to take that money, because it makes sense for you to take that money. It makes perfect sense because if you give the wallet back and the wallet had $200 in it, you are $200 down on that deal. Right? Nobody would ever take you to court or prosecute you for taking that money. Just take the money out and throw the wallet in a dumpster. There. You're bulletproof. You'll never be caught. You've made $200. It cost you nothing. And there's no risk of ever being apprehended. There. The victimless crime, right? But that is sinfulness. And you are only stealing that money not because you are forced or coerced into doing so. You are stealing that money because you want to. Because you understand that $200 is a lot better than $0, which you would make if you gave the wallet back. If you give the wallet back, the person will be very grateful. They'll say, thank you so much. But you get nothing except for the knowledge that you did the right thing. And that desire to have that money brings forth the sin of keeping that money. And that's where, like, the consequences of sin and death and whatnot come from. They come from the desire of the human being to sin and to do things that are wrong and wicked and evil. It's a real thing that happens with us and for us that we've got to start getting away from. I mean, we can't. We're bound by our sinful nature, for sure. But knowing that our sinful nature is there is the one thing that lets you fight it. Because if you're somebody who believes that people just don't have a sinful nature, that they're honestly good people that are all trying their best, if people were good people and just trying their best, we would have made some progress by now, but we haven't. We've gotten worse. And like you get worse significantly, the less you understand that there is a problem. If you say that there are no problems and that everything is just fine, you'll never get any kind of solution there. It's like they do with Alcoholics Anonymous. That step one in Alcoholics Anonymous is admitting you have a problem. If you don't do that, you're never going to get anywhere. You will never even make it 1 millimeter towards where you want to go, as long as you say, oh, I don't have a problem. Great, well, there we are. Do not be deceived, my beloved brothers. Every good and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. Of his own will he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. Every good and every perfect gift is from above, and there's no variation or shadow due to change. Yeah, okay, that there, that says there's no shadow of change, no shadow of turning with God, that there is, again, it's more important than we think it is, that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever, that there's no change, no variance, nothing like that with him. That's really important and really key, because it's very easy for us to assume that in some way Jesus Christ would get more up to date, if you see what I mean, that he would change and alter himself to fit us, instead of requiring that we would alter ourselves to fit him. That's the deal, right? As a Christian, you have to understand that if you are a Christian person and you are saying that Jesus Christ should change himself, his word, his doctrine, whatever, to fit where we're at right now, that's exceedingly dangerous. It's also a bad idea. Why you would want that is quite beyond me, because Christ presents things as moral absolutes that are not subject to change. The essential core principle doesn't change. Now, the material results do, and I'll explain what I mean. So picture for a second a commandment that says, thou shalt not steal. Right. Now, if this was 500 AD, and you were going to steal something, you would have to physically pick up and steal an object, right? Like you would have to go somewhere, to somebody's house, and take something from them. But these days, you can steal all kinds of things that aren't physical items. You can steal information. You can steal media. You can steal money that isn't physical money. Like you can siphon out of people's bank accounts, and all that happens is one number went up and one number went down, but no physical items were moved. That kind of thing. But it's still theft. Now, what I mean by all this is that the material conditions of theft have changed, but the stealing hasn't. Stealing is wrong either way. It's just that the way we steal has changed. So there's no changing or no variation or shadow of changing with Christ on that moral level, even though our stealing, our committing adultery, our murdering has changed significantly over time. But the way that we do it, but the actual moral problem has remained the same. And our desire shouldn't be as Christians for Christ to update his commandments. Instead, it should be for us to say, great, how do our lives fit in with these commandments now? When Christ tells us not to steal, or I guess coveting is even better. Because coveting says, you shall not covet your neighbor's his house, his wife, his manservant, his maidservant, his ox, or his donkey. Anybody here have a neighbor who has an ox?
Got a nice ox.
Yeah, right. Or a donkey or anything like that? Like, we really don't. Our neighbors don't have those things. And if my neighbor had a donkey, I sure wouldn't be coveting it. Like, there's no way I'd be sitting there thinking, man, I wish I had that donkey. Like, no way. No, I don't want a donkey. But of course, it doesn't just say that. It says his ox or his donkey or anything that belongs to your neighbor. It leaves it open enough for you to say, for God to say, you're not supposed to covet anything that belongs to your neighbor. Because there's no way, like if God were to say in 1400 BC, if he were to say, you shall not covet your neighbor's widescreen TV, everybody who was hearing that at the time would say, what is that? What on earth is that? But it's left wide open enough for us to say, right, we're not supposed to do any of these things. Like, just because our technology, our material circumstances have changed, doesn't mean the morals have changed. Those are the same. You can't monkey around with the essential core principles. Theft is wrong no matter what you're stealing. That's the basic principle there. Murder is wrong no matter who you're murdering. Adultery is wrong no matter who you're committing adultery with. Just because you've changed your material conditions doesn't mean that you get around the essential core morality that is presented as an absolute, right? It's very important. So, what the book of James is teaching you is, as a Christian, not as somebody who is thinking about maybe becoming a Christian someday, but as an actual, real, observant, real world Christian. What is your sin? What are your desires? Why do you sin? It's not enough to say, because the Bible does say that Christ takes away sins. That is true. But then you as a Christian will always be saying, yes, but what are my sins? What are my sins? Have I committed any sins? I can't think of any, that kind of thing. And things like the book of James will remind you of what your sinfulness is. It'll bring to light what that is. It'll tell you that you are committing sins because you want to. Yes, you are tempted by the devil for sure, but you are blessed when you've withstood this trial and stood up to it. If you give in to it on the first second of every day, it does you nothing. You are supposed to be resisting sinfulness. You are supposed to be fighting back against temptation, that kind of thing. And when you give in, it's not because you had no choice. It's because you did have a choice and you chose to give in. You had every option of not giving into this sinfulness, but you chose to do so because it benefited you to do that. There will always be a means of escape out of your temptation. That's in 1 Corinthians. There will always be a means out of that temptation, but you can choose to fall into it out of your own desire, not because God makes you, but because you openly, honestly, and earnestly desire to commit sins. Once you have gotten that through your head, once you have understood that, yes, you sin because you want to sin, you have a desire to sin, you have a will to sin, once you've gotten that through your head, then you will understand all the more that these are things that you have to grapple with. And the biggest thing you have to grapple with is yourself. You are a sinner because you wish to be one. That is huge. That's a very big thing to work through as a Christian. It's far easier to try and offload this onto somebody else, to say, well, I sinned because somebody made me, and like Adam did. Adam said, well, this woman you gave me. And then the woman says, well, this serpent you put here. Yeah, that kind of thing. But no, we sin because we want to sin. We have that desire in us to sin, and we fall into it, and we're prone to it. Your life as a Christian is never supposed to be trying to find excuses for these things. Your life as a Christian is supposed to be pleading guilty before God to these sins and asking for his forgiveness. That's important. That's a real thing that you have to deal with, work with, and work on. Your biggest opposition being yourself. Once you've had that level of honesty, then you can start to make some progress. But until you do, if you are always saying, well, it's not my fault, it's, this woman you gave me, it's this serpent you put here, it's this, you shouldn't have made me so flawed. Yeah, get out of here with that. You sin because you want to. And when you understand that about yourself, you can see that with some clarity with other people, who are all sinners, by the way. Everybody you know, everybody you've seen, they're all sinners anyway. But once you understand that their nature is as corrupt as yours, again, you can start to make some progress with them, not saying to them what we say now, which is that people have to be perfect, and when they've been discovered to be imperfect, then they are canceled. No, man, they're all imperfect. They're all going to be varying degrees of bad news. All right, that'll do it for me for this morning, unless there are further questions from anybody. All right. Then I thank you all for joining me this morning, and I wish you well for the remainder of your Sunday.